Hi, thank you for having me at the Utah Rare Plant Meeting. My name is Ian Eggleston, and today I will be talking about my work that I've been doing on modeling Pediomelum aromaticum. Before we get started talking about the ecological niche model that I made for this plant, first we should understand what Pediomelum aromaticum is. Um, there's three different varieties of Pediomelum aromaticum, and these photos, all taken by Dr. Ashley Egan, shows us what the varieties kind of look like. As we can see on the left, we have variety 2EI, which is a bit more flat and it kind of makes these mats along the ground. In the middle, we have variety Barnabii, which is kind of like a hybrid. It kind of is flat and a little bit taller. And on the right side, sorry, I'm cutting it off a little bit, we have variety Aromaticum, which is a lot more upright and a lot more erect. All of these varieties seem to inhabit different areas too. Like 2EI seems to inhabit the Needles Outlook region just south of Moab a lot. Barnabii seems to inhabit a lot of like the Kanab region, and the variety Aromaticum seems to really like it in Colorado. This next slide provides us some more background knowledge on Aromaticum and where it inhabits. The left map is a map that shows its current distribution and what the states kind of think of it. So as we can see, it has its populations in Colorado, around the Moab / Richardson Ampersand area, and in the Paradox Valley in Colorado. And it also has a population on the Arizona-Utah border in the Kanab region. Utah and Colorado both consider Aromaticum imperiled, and Arizona considers Aromaticum critically imperiled. And this kind of gives Aromaticum its status of being threatened. And on the right side of this slide, we have a map that shows georeference locations from museum records of Aromaticum and a bunch of points that Dr. Egan actually went out and found. And as we can see, we see this similar range. The blue squares on this map, sorry, I cut off the key a little bit. The blue squares on this map represent the Barnabii variety. The yellow diamonds represent the 2EI variety. The purple diamonds represent the Aromaticum variety, and the gray circles represent undocumented or unspecified varieties. These mostly come from the museum herbarium records, but they're all probably Aromaticum. So this slide is a photo of Pediomelum aromaticum, and it really highlights why this plant is unique among other intermountain species, especially of Pediomelum. It has this really distinct coalescent branching pattern, which can be seen really nicely in this photo. This is one of the things that really makes this plant distinct from others. This image is from the Colorado Rare Plant Guide, and it just tells us a little bit more about what Aromaticum looks like. It has this really distinct leaves and flowering points at the end of its branches, and it has those very distinct points of branching that we saw in that photo earlier. Its flowers tend to be about 15 to 20 millimeters long, and it has kind of very, very short stems on it. It's distributed around Utah, Arizona, and Colorado, and it seems to inhabit open pinyon juniper woodlands. It likes sandy soils or adobe hills, and it likes to inhabit elevations between 4,800 to 5,700 vertical feet. So now that we understand what Aromaticum looks like and where it likes to inhabit, we can start talking about the model that I've created for it. So the goals of this project was to create an ecological niche model for Pediomelum aromaticum, and this would allow us to better understand what ecological conditions, specifically climate conditions, impact the range of Pediomelum aromaticum. It would allow us to identify the most impactful variables to Pediomelum aromaticum, specifically those climate variables. It would allow us to create a predictive range model based on presence-only data for Pediomelum aromaticum, and this would allow us to do things like prospecting in the future, which could be really useful for identifying undocumented populations and better understanding its range in the future. And this project was also created for the hope of creating a nice foundation for funding to continue research on Pediomelum aromaticum and related allies. So this project's methods are pretty straightforward, especially for ecological niche modeling. First, we needed to georeference occurrence data from herbarium records, and we got these herbarium records off of SciNet. We used the herbarium record descriptions, the townships and range, and satellite imagery to georeference these. All of the georeferencing was done by me. Specifically, the tools I used to do this was Google Maps, USGS TopoView, and ArcGIS PLSS Map Viewer. Additionally, I acquired occurrence records from Dr. Egan that she went on a prospecting trip for Pediomelum aromaticum in 2020 to try to locate all known populations. She went to go find a bunch of the herbarium records, and she found a lot of GPS coordinates for a bunch of populations. So I used that occurrence data that she gathered. Additionally, I had to comb through the data set to exclude erroneous occurrence data. This included things where herbarium records incorrectly identified something as aromaticum, or where the herbarium descriptions didn't really line up with anywhere that made sense, so we couldn't be super sure on the georeferencing. And then we had to create the ecological niche model using QGIS and Maxent. Getting more into the specifics about that modeling, we used QGIS to clip the climate rasters from WorldClim to a smaller, more relevant study area. This was also used to visualize the ENMN in models that you'll see. And the Maxent algorithm was used to create the predictive ecological niche model. The specific settings that we used were the auto features with an output format of cloglog. We used the random test percentage of 25. We replicated it 15 times. We set the maximum iterations to 5,000s, and we used that 25% of random test data that was excluded to cross-validate the results of the running of Maxent. This is the completed ecological niche model that Maxent provided us. The red areas on this model are predicted areas where aromaticum would thrive in. Yellow areas are it would also do well in. Green areas are areas that it could probably do okay in. Lighter blue areas are it probably wouldn't inhabit there, but it might. And then the darker blue areas are probably where it wouldn't exist or thrive. As we can see, there's about 4 regions that the model predicted that Pediomelum aromaticum would inhabit. And like in the range map that we saw earlier, these areas are included. We see the Kanab region in the southwest corner of Utah and the northmost part of Arizona. We see the Moab/Richardson amphitheater region kind of on the east side of Utah. We see the Paradox Valley region in Colorado next to Moab and the Richardson amphitheater. And then a surprise is that the model predicted this area in New Mexico close to the Navajo Lake State Park that Pediomelum aromaticum could thrive in. This is the created model with the occurrence data used to train the model overlaid on it. The pink circles are the occurrence data. There's 2 very interesting things that we can kind of gather from this image. The first thing is in that region in New Mexico, we see no known occurrences of Pediomelum aromaticum. With such a strongly predicted value, it might be worth, our future endeavors could include a prospecting trip to that region to try to find some occurrences, or it could be the focus of future propagation once we create more models and understand more about Pediomelum aromaticum. Additionally, we see a lot of the occurrences in the yellow regions on the map. These are not the perfect environments that Pediomelum aromaticum should inhabit based on our model. It's quite interesting to see that a lot of them don't inhabit the red regions. Some factors of that could be like slope aspect, soil typing, human interaction with Pediomelum aromaticum. We just aren't sure yet. We might need to create more models. A couple of problems with this model created is sampling bias and overtraining, but we can talk about that later. So another thing that this project aimed to do was to understand what climate variables impact Pediomelum aromaticum the most. And very interestingly, our model only predicted that 2 variables impact more than 70% of aromaticum's range. Those 2 variables being the mean diurnal range and the precipitation of the driest quarter. Something that I discussed earlier was how the soil type may impact aromaticum, and this is a very interesting image that kind of shows that. In the top left corner, we see the Castle Valley region / Richardson amphitheater region, and we see that the soil is very distinctly red. Additionally, in the bottom left corner, we see that the soil is a little bit red, but also mostly white. And on the right side of this slide, we have the region close to the Navajo Lake State Park that the model predicted Pediomelum aromaticum could inhabit. And we see a lot of white, almost yellow, and red soils. So it could be realistic that aromaticum could be in this region. Another interesting thing that these satellite images provide for us is that different varieties seem to prefer different types of soil, but this hypothesis needs to be tested more. So in conclusion, the creation of this model was very successful. This model seems to be somewhat predictive, but probably overtrained, and this overtraining is due to the resolution of Maxent. A lot of our occurrence data appears very clustered and close to each other, and Maxent can only see in 1 kilometer resolutions, and this can lead to overtraining of the model. Future work may involve fixing that overtraining, but more on that later. This project was also helpful to learn more about what climate variables impact Pediomelum aromaticum. This project was really a stepping stone for bigger projects, and future prospects of this project are we need to remove redundancy and fix the overtraining of the model. We need to also account for some of the sampling bias in this model. If we can gather more variables that may impact Pediomelum aromaticum like soil type, slope aspect, or foliage cover, we can create a more accurate species distribution model. Additionally, we'd like to create a future climate change model based on climate change data from WorldClim to understand how climate change may impact the range of aromaticum. We'd also like to use these models to prospect for new populations, especially in that Navajo Lake region. And we would also really like to get into more genetic testing on Pediomelum aromaticum to hopefully differentiate between the varieties a bit better. That wraps up my project. Finally, I'd like to give some acknowledgments and talk about the funding of this project. I've applied for a grant through UVU to provide funding for future prospecting trips. And I'd also like to note that this project is part of a larger project that Dr. Egan is seeking funding for. It includes conservation genetics and species delimitation of Pediomelum periansi, Pediomelum aromaticum, and allies. This includes applications to the BLM threatened plant proposals for Colorado and Utah. Finally, I'd like to thank Dr. Egan for being a very good mentor, for helping me along with this project and providing a lot of data for this project. I'd like to thank the herbarium records for housing the information about these species occurrences on SciNet. I'd like to give thanks to UVU. And finally, I'd like to shout out all of these references that were key in the creation of this project. With that, I would be happy to take any questions that anyone has.